Imagine you're holding a coin and it's spinning.
Right. Just spinning on a table.
Yeah, spinning so incredibly fast that it's just a blur. So you look at it and it's basically both heads and tails at the exact same time.
Because you literally can't isolate it to one state while it's moving like that.
Exactly. Now imagine taking $16 billion, 16 billion with a B, and betting that you can build a revolutionary, world-changing computer out of that spinning coin.
I mean, when you phrase it like that, it sounds completely insane.
It sounds like science fiction, but that is the actual reality of the quantum market right now.
Yeah, it really is.
Usually, when you look at a financial projection for some new tech, you expect to see this safe linear trajectory, just a nice predictable line inching up a graph.
Right, maybe a few percentage points of growth a year.
Right. But today, we are looking at this highly niche market that's valued at, well, about $1.10 billion in 2024. And it is quietly projected to just completely explode to over $16 billion by 2034.
Which is, that's a compound annual growth rate of nearly 31%.
Yeah, it's staggering.
It's the kind of curve that just forces you to completely recalibrate your entire understanding of what's possible in a market. Growth like that, it almost never appears in established industries.
Right.
It really only shows up at the absolute birth of something foundational, something that's going to fundamentally rewrite the rules of the entire global economy.
Which brings us perfectly to the mission of our deep dive today. If you're listening to this and wondering, why the smartest, most ruthless money in the world is pouring into a technology that sounds like magic, you're in the right place.
We're getting deep into the weeds today.
We really are. We're exploring insights from Nishant Prabhakar's book, The Next Frontier, Investing in Quantum Computing. And specifically, we're going to decode how private equity investors are navigating what can only be described as a bizarre, totally gravity-free market to fund the quantum revolution.
Yeah, gravity-free is the perfect term for it.
Because they are, abandoning all traditional financial logic. They're adopting entirely new frameworks and betting on a future that I'd say most people can't even fully comprehend yet.
No, they really can't. And to really grasp the sheer scale of the money moving around here, we have to understand the transition that's taking place.
Set the stage for us.
So the last 50 years, we have lived safely inside the classical computing era.
The era of the microchip?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And progress was incredibly predictable. It was linear. We shrank transistors. We doubled processing power every couple of years. And boom, the modern digital world was born.
Our smartphones, the internet, all of it.
Right. But we are now transitioning out of that era. We're entering the quantum era, which is, it's probabilistic. It's incredibly fragile, and it's driven by these massive sudden leaps in physics rather than just steady engineering.
Okay, so before we can understand how these private equity firms are actually deploying their billions, we really need to understand why.
Why jump ship when classical computing has made everyone so rich?
Exactly. Why leave the safety of what we know? And the simplest answer from the sources is that classical computing is literally running out of road. We are hitting this thing the industry calls the silicon cliff.
Yeah, the silicon cliff,
Yeah.
which is really just the death of Moore's law.
Right.
For decades, the whole tech industry just relied on this observation that the number of transistors you could fit on a microchip would double roughly every 2 years.
It was like the heartbeat of Silicon Valley.
It was. But there is a hard, actual physical limit to how small you can carve a silicon switch. Today, the transistors on the most advanced chips have shrunk to the size of literally a few atoms.
Which is mind-blowing in itself.
It is. But when you get down to the atomic scale, nature stops playing by our rules. The universe just starts fighting back.
I want to make sure we unpack that because it's a huge point. When you say the universe fights back, you're talking about the classical rules of physics just breaking down, right?
Yeah.
The electrons don't behave like predictable little marbles flowing through a pipe anymore, do they?
Not at all. At that microscopic scale, you encounter this phenomenon called quantum tunneling.
Okay, quantum tunneling, what is that?
So, in a classical chip, you build a tiny physical barrier to contain an electron. It acts like an off switch.
Like a dam holding back water.
Right. But because the electron is so incredibly small down at that atomic level, it starts behaving like a wave. It just slips right through the solid barrier.
Wait, it just passes right through a solid wall.
It does. It appears on the other side where it has absolutely no logical reason to be. And when electrons leak like that...
They generate heat.
Exactly. They generate a massive amount of heat. Suddenly, the heat becomes completely unmanageable. The materials themselves literally reach their physical breaking points. You simply cannot cool a silicon chip past the laws of thermodynamics.
Wow. So the hardware is hitting a wall. But the cruel irony here, and the sources really highlight this, is that the problems we need these computers to solve are growing faster than ever.
Oh yeah, exponentially faster.
Things like drug discovery, materials science, climate modeling, they are completely choking our classical supercomputers.
They're just hitting a massive bottleneck.
Yeah, Prabhakar gives this mind-bending example in the book about simulating a single protein fold to create a new life-saving drug. Because classical computers process information sequentially, meaning they have to look at every single possible configuration one by one.
Like checking every single key on a massive key ring.
Yes. Analyzing a complex protein on a classical supercomputer could literally take longer than the age of the universe.
Which is insane.
Huh.
But that happens because those problems grow combinatorially.
Combinatorially?
Yeah, think about combinatorial growth like planning a road trip. If you had to visit, say, 3 cities, there are only a few possible routes.
Sure, easy enough.
But if you add 10 more cities, the number of possible routes doesn't just double, it explodes into the millions. Every new variable causes the complexity to multiply exponentially.
And classical computers just can't keep up with that.
Right, classical computers are amazing, but representing everything as a rigid 1 or a 0 forces them into a bottleneck when they're dealing with the staggering complexity of nature.
The book introduces this concept using an analogy that I really want to run by you to see if it holds up.
Sure, let's hear it.
It compares classical computing to an orderly city, like straight lines, predictable intersections, traffic lights. But quantum computing is the wild, untamed wilderness just beyond the city walls.
I like that.
Right. So in the city, you have the classical bit. It's like a coin resting flat on a table. It is definitively either heads or tails, 0 or 1.
Exactly.
But out in the quantum wilderness, you have the qubit. And the book describes a qubit in superposition as being like that coin we talked about earlier, a coin spinning in a blur on the table. And while it's spinning, it represents both heads and tails simultaneously. Is that essentially what superposition is?
It is, yeah. That's a fantastic way to visualize it. And what's fascinating here is if we take that spinning coin analogy one step further, we introduce a concept called entanglement.
Entanglement. Okay.
Imagine 2 spinning coins on that table. If they are entangled, they are magically fundamentally linked. What happens to one instantly affects the other, no matter how far apart they are.
Even if one is on Earth and one is on the moon.
Even then.
Yeah.
So instead of evaluating one coin at a time, a quantum computer evaluates the entire interconnected system all at once.
Oh.
This means it isn't just a faster version of the laptop on your desk, it is an entirely new computational language. Nature doesn't operate in crisp zeros and ones.
Right. Nature is messy.
Very messy. Chemical reactions operate through probabilities, wave functions, entanglement. By using qubits, a quantum computer can explore vast, sprawling landscapes of solutions simultaneously. It speaks nature's native language.
But speaking nature's native language comes with a massive catch. Because it relies on this incredibly strange, almost spooky physics, the growth curve of this tech isn't a smooth line on a graph.
Not at all. That is the crux of the whole issue. Quantum's growth curve is completely jagged.
Jagged, yeah.
It's driven by sudden, dramatic bursts of subatomic breakthroughs, like, say, a physicist in a lab figuring out how to keep a qubit stable for just a fraction of a second longer.
Which is huge for them.
It is.
Yeah.
But that sudden breakthrough is almost always followed by a long, agonizing lag, where engineers spend 3 years trying to figure out how to actually manufacture that tiny breakthrough at an industrial scale.
Okay, hold on. I have to stop you there and push back a little bit.
Go for it.
Okay, let's unpack this. If the growth curve is this jagged, and it's entirely based on subatomic weirdness that literally made Albert Einstein uncomfortable.
I hated it.
Right. So how on earth does a private equity firm actually evaluate a quantum startup? Private equity investors live and die by their spreadsheets. They want to see annual recurring revenue. They want customer churn rates. They want proven sales cycles.
They want predictability.
Yes. But in the quantum world, those traditional metrics seem completely non-existent. You can't value a company on its recurring revenue if it has 0 commercial products and literally 0 revenue.
Are these firms just, I don't know, throwing billions of dollars at darts in the dark?
I mean, I get why you'd say that. It absolutely looks like a massive gamble from the outside. You are operating in a gravity-free market where the traditional financial laws of gravity just don't apply whatsoever.
It sounds terrifying for an investor.
It would be, but it's actually a highly calculated pivot. The investors aren't gambling. They've just recognized that in the quantum space, scientific risk has completely replaced commercial risk.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
In a normal software startup, you know the code is going to run, right? The risk is whether consumers will actually want to buy it.
Right. Is there a market fit?
Exactly. But in quantum, the market demand is already guaranteed. Everyone wants this. The only risk is whether the machine will actually work without breaking the laws of physics. So the due diligence changes entirely. They aren't asking, who is your target demographic? They're asking, can you actually control the subatomic realm?
Which is exactly why private equity firms are now literally hiring quantum physicists to lead their due diligence teams.
They're hiring physicists instead of MBAs?
They have to. They've thrown out the financial roadmaps. Prabhakar's book actually outlines 8 different layers of due diligence needed for this space.
8 layers.
Yeah, but the ones that represent the most radical departure from traditional finance are the science and talent layers. These physicists aren't looking at sales pipelines. They're evaluating something called coherence times.
Coherence times. What does that actually mean for the machine?
If we go back to your spinning coin analogy, coherence time is simply how long that coin can keep spinning before it wobbles and falls flat on the table.
Before it reverts back to a boring classical 1 or 0.
Exactly. Qubits are incredibly fragile. Any interference from the outside world, a stray photon, a tiny vibration in the floor, or even just a fraction of a degree of heat creates what they call thermal noise.
And that noise messes up the calculation.
That noise bumps the table, the coin falls over, and the calculation is instantly destroyed.
Which explains why these startups operate in these highly exotic, freezing cold lab environments. They're basically just trying to isolate the coin so it can keep spinning.
Exactly. And alongside coherence times, the physicists are measuring gate fidelities, which is really just a fancy way of asking, how many logical operations can we actually perform on this qubit while it's spinning before errors creep in and corrupt the data?
So the PE firms are trying to measure stability.
Right. The due diligence process is desperately trying to figure out if a startup's success relies on heroic, one-off lab interventions by some genius PhD student, or if that stable coherence can actually be manufactured reliably in a commercial factory.
But who is actually running these tests? You mentioned these heroic lab interventions, which implies that a private equity firm needs a lot more than just money to make this work. They need a hyper-specific type of human brain to even turn these machines on in the first place, which I guess brings us to the talent layer of the diligence.
Well, the talent bottleneck is arguably the biggest hurdle in the entire industry. Human capital in quantum is so ridiculously scarce that it is literally treated as a tangible financial asset on a balance sheet.
Like holding real estate or gold.
Exactly. The sources highlight this critical role called the quantum translator.
A translator? Between what? The physicists and the investors?
No, actually between the physics and the real-world applications. A quantum translator is someone who speaks the deep, incredibly dense mathematical language of quantum mechanics, but also speaks the language of a specific commercial domain.
Oh, like pharmaceuticals or global logistics?
Yeah. Yes. Because you could build the most powerful quantum computer in the universe, but without a chemist who understands how to actually format a complex molecular simulation into quantum algorithms.
The machine just sits there.
It just sits there, humming in the dark. A startup that has successfully hired a team of these translators is incredibly valuable, regardless of their current revenue, simply because they hold the keys to making the hardware actually useful.
Man. So if the due diligence is this intensely complex and the risk of the physics failing is so astronomically high, how does an investor actually pick a winning startup? Because we haven't even talked about the fact that there is a massive hardware race happening right now. There isn't just one way to build a spinning coin.
No, there isn't. And the secret to picking the winning qubit architecture is that the smartest investors don't even try.
They don't try to pick the winner.
They don't, because no one knows which modality will actually reach the holy grail of the industry first, which, by the way, is called fault tolerance. That's a state where the computer can automatically correct its own errors faster than they occur.
And the competing modalities out there trying to reach fault tolerance sound completely wild. I mean, if you're listening to this and wondering why your smartphone isn't going to have a quantum chip in it next year, this is why.
It's not fitting in your pocket anytime soon.
No. You have companies building superconducting loops that have to be cooled to literally interstellar temperatures. You have competing labs using trapped ions, which are atomic particles suspended in a vacuum by ultra-precision lasers.
It's pure sci-fi.
And then you have groups shooting packets of light through photonic circuits and others using optical tweezers to manipulate neutral atoms. They are all racing toward the exact same finish line using entirely different branches of physics.
And because the winner is totally unknown, strategic investors diversify.
Yeah.
But more importantly, they employ a strategy that looks beyond the hardware race altogether. They bet on the foundational ecosystem.
Meaning they don't just buy the computer companies.
Right. They invest heavily in what the industry calls the enablers and the software layers.
So what does this all mean? To me, this really reminds me of a modern take on the 1849 gold rush.
Oh, the classic pickaxes strategy.
Exactly. Instead of trying to guess which individual miner is going to strike a vein of gold, you invest in the companies selling the pickaxes. But, to bring it into the modern tech era, it's like selling the cell towers instead of trying to guess whether people will eventually buy a BlackBerry, a Nokia, or an iPhone.
That's a great analogy.
You build the infrastructure that all of them are going to need regardless of who ultimately wins the hardware war.
That is the perfect way to look at it. If we connect this to the bigger picture, those pickaxes, or cell towers, are the physical enablers of the quantum era.
What do those look like in reality?
We are talking about companies that build dilution refrigerators.
Dilution refrigerators?
Yeah, these are massive, highly complex cylinders designed to reach millikelvin temperatures. We are talking about environments that are just a fraction of a degree above absolute zero.
Which is colder than deep space.
Literally colder than the vacuum of space. And why do they need that? Because as we discussed, any ambient heat creates thermal noise that destroys the qubit's superposition.
So every time a research lab, a university, or a major tech giant wants to experiment with superconducting qubits, they have to buy one of these million-dollar refrigerators from an enabler company.
Precisely the point. Whether they're using trapped ions or superconductors, they all need ultra-precision lasers, microwave control systems, and specialized vacuum chambers.
So the PE firms just buy the vacuum chamber guys.
Yeah, the beauty of investing in these enabler companies is that they are generating real, tangible revenue today. They provide actual cash flow that buffers the private equity portfolio while the investors are sitting around waiting for the central quantum hardware to mature.
That is so smart. And it isn't just the hardware enablers, right? The book also talks about application specialists, which are basically software companies that aren't even trying to build a quantum computer at all. Instead, they're building hybrid quantum classical software.
Yes. The hybrid approach is absolutely brilliant because it bridges the gap between today's technology and tomorrow's promise.
How does that work?
Think of the classical supercomputer as a brilliant project manager and the quantum processor as a highly specialized consultant.
Okay.
The classical computer handles 99% of a logistical calculation, but when it hits an agonizing combinatorial bottleneck like, say, optimizing the shipping routes of 10,000 cargo ships simultaneously.
Where the classical computer would normally choke.
Exactly. Instead of choking, it formats that specific chunk of the equation into quantum logic, hands it to the quantum processor, gets the answer back in seconds, and then the classical computer translates it back and finishes the job.
Wow.
These application specialists are solving real logistical and chemical problems for enterprise clients right now. They're proving the ecosystem has massive value long before we even reach full fault tolerance.
That paints a really clear picture of how you'd build a PE portfolio here. But it leads us to the ultimate question of the private equity industry. The exit. Let's say you've navigated this gravity-free market, you've hired the physicists, you've evaluated the coherence times, and you've built this diverse ecosystem of dilution refrigerators and hybrid software. Here's where it gets really interesting. How do you value an unfinished cathedral? And more importantly, how do you eventually cash out?
Valuations here require a massive leap of faith compared to traditional SaaS companies.
Yeah.
You're basically valuing a firm based on its scientific trajectory and the defensibility of its intellectual property.
It's all about the IP.
Totally. The risk profile is completely binary. The downside is a 100% total loss if the underlying physics simply refuses to scale. But the upside is a transformative trillion-dollar market that redefines every physical industry on Earth.
But how do you actually execute an exit? If these startups don't have a massive customer base and recurring revenue, they aren't exactly going to have a typical Wall Street initial public offering. You can't just ring the bell at the NYSE with a vacuum chamber and no customers.
No, you can't. The initial exits won't look like that at all. They will mirror historical frontier tech acquisitions.
Like what?
Think about the early days of artificial intelligence. Specifically, look at when Google acquired DeepMind. When that acquisition happened, DeepMind didn't have a polished commercial product. They didn't have massive revenue streams.
They were just a really smart lab?
They were essentially a research lab filled with brilliant minds, quantum translators, and a vision. Google bought them because they represented strategic inevitability.
Strategic inevitability.
Yes. You can also look at the early days of NVIDIA back when they were just a niche graphics card company before deep learning exploded. Or Moderna back when mRNA was just a highly speculative platform.
I really want to dig into that phrase, strategic inevitability, because how do you put $1 billion price tag on inevitability? You are essentially asking a corporate buyer to pay a massive premium based purely on FOMO, the fear of missing out.
It is FOMO, absolutely. But it's FOMO on a macroeconomic, completely existential scale.
Right.
The biggest financial returns in frontier technology always happen in the gap between what the world currently perceives and what the future absolutely requires. Imagine a massive legacy telecommunications giant looking at a young photonic quantum networking startup, or a global pharmaceutical company looking at a quantum simulation firm.
The legacy giant isn't buying the startup because they want the startup's current clients, because there are none.
Exactly. They are buying the startup because they are terrified of being erased from the map.
Oh.
If a rival pharma company gets their hands on a hybrid quantum simulator that could design a blockbuster drug in 6 months instead of 10 years, the legacy company's entire business model is dead overnight.
They just cease to exist.
Right. So the exit strategy relies entirely on strategic urgency. You are selling the keys to the future to a corporate giant who knows that if they don't buy those keys right now, their competitors definitely will.
Okay, let's take a breath, because we have covered some seriously dense, fascinating territory today.
We really have.
For everyone listening, let's just quickly connect the dots. Classical computing is hitting a physical wall at the atomic scale, struggling with these massive combinatorial problems. So, to keep progressing, the world is shifting to quantum computing, which uses the bizarre probabilistic rules of superposition to explore massive data sets simultaneously.
The spinning coins.
The spinning coins. Private equity investors are navigating this weird transition by throwing out their financial spreadsheets and relying on physicists to measure coherence times and gate fidelities.
Yep.
They're hedging their bets by investing in the foundational infrastructure, the lasers, the cooling systems, the pickaxes, basically, and they are banking on massive future payouts driven by legacy corporations terrified of becoming obsolete.
That is a perfect summary. And, that summary actually brings us to a critical pivot point. It raises an issue that I think is arguably the most profound takeaway from Prabhak's newer text, the compute shift.
Oh, right. Let's get into that.
Up until now in this conversation, we've been talking about quantum computing as a standalone product, right? Like an isolated machine sitting in a freezing lab, solving specific corporate bottlenecks for a pharma company.
Yeah.
But the nature of computing itself is evolving. We were transitioning from computing being something that an organization merely uses into computing being a shared global infrastructure.
Meaning it will function more like the electricity grid or the global telecommunications network.
Exactly. The systems that run the world in the next decade won't be isolated laptops or single servers. They will be massive, cloud-based hybrid platforms combining artificial intelligence, high-performance classical supercomputing, and quantum processors all working together.
And when computing power reaches the level of a global utility like that, it stops being just a business story about private equity returns, doesn't it?
It does. It becomes a geopolitical story. Quantum computing is widely considered the ultimate dual-use technology.
And when we say dual use in this context, we mean it possesses the capability for incredible world-saving good, but also the potential for catastrophic harm.
Exactly. Think about it. A fault-tolerant quantum computer is the tool that could finally simulate a room-temperature superconductor.
Which would change everything.
It would. It would allow us to transmit electricity globally with zero loss. It could revolutionize our energy grids and design carbon capture materials to literally reverse climate change.
That's the world-saving part.
But that exact same machine has a terrifying dark side. A fully realized quantum computer could run algorithms that instantly shatter the cryptographic foundations of the modern world.
Okay, this is where it gets really terrifying. If I'm following you, Current public key encryption, like the math that protects our banking records, our personal emails, and classified military communications, that all relies on the fact that classical computers are terrible at factoring massive prime numbers.
Right. It would take a classical supercomputer thousands of years to guess the right combination to break that math.
But a quantum computer, because it can evaluate all those possibilities simultaneously in a state of superposition, it could crack those massive prime numbers almost instantly.
Yep. The encryption that guards global financial systems and state secrets would just become utterly useless overnight.
Wow.
It is essentially a geopolitical nuke. It is the ultimate weapon and the ultimate cure, sitting inside the exact same millikelvin refrigerator.
So when we talk about private equity firms and strategic venture capital funding this revolution, the ultimate question for you as a listener isn't just about whether these investors get their 31% compound annual growth rate.
Not at all.
It's about the architecture of global power. When these private entities fund the underlying infrastructure of our future, whose hands are they ultimately putting the keys to the universe into?
That is the trillion-dollar question. The people building the pickaxes today are the ones who will control the gold tomorrow. And in this case, the gold is the fundamental data security and scientific capability of the entire human race.
It is such a chilling, awe-inspiring thought to walk away with. We started this deep dive looking at a basic financial projection, a niche market growing from $1 billion to $16 billion. Just a line shooting up on a graph.
But it's so much more than that.
It is. Behind that number isn't just a story about venture capital. It's the story of humanity stepping out of the orderly, predictable city of classical logic and walking boldly out into the wild, unpredictable wilderness of nature's deepest laws. And right now, the smart money is betting absolutely everything they have that we figure out how to survive out there. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.